Summer had come to the island of Sodor. Engines were hard at work pulling passengers and goods trains. The engines were working harder than ever before, and this would soon come to the attention of the Fat Controller. One day, the Fat Controller came to the sheds.
Engines, I have good news.
What is it, sir?
Emily's overhaul is just finished, and she will be coming back to help us with the ever-increasing workload.
The engines were excited. They haven't met Emily since the spring had just started, and now she was coming home.
Emily will be returning to Tidmouth pretty soon, so I will be giving out your jobs before she comes.
Okay, sir.
Thomas, Percy, and Toby, you will work on the Farquhar branch line. Edward, you will take passengers from Wellsworth to Sudbury. Gordon, you will be back to pulling the express.
Yes! Success, baby!
Good grief.
Henry, you will be doing your work in the forest once again.
Henry was excited. He couldn't wait to see his animal friends again.
Duck, Oliver, Donald, and Douglas, you will be working on the Little Western.
Yes, sir. Aye, sir. Then the Fat Controller turned to James, but before he could speak, a familiar whistle sounded out.
She's here!
Indeed she was. Emily had returned to the sheds, and the engines all welcomed her back home. Despite looking the same as before, she now had a new number 12 on her tender, and it made her feel like she really belonged. Emily puffed happily into the sheds next to Edward.
Welcome back, Emily.
Thanks, sir. It feels good to be back.
I'll say, and you came right on time. So many people are coming to live on this island, and we can barely keep up with the workload.
Indeed. Anyway, James, for your job, you must pull a coal train from Tidmouth to Brundham.
James was outraged. Ever since his first day in Sodor, when the trucks made him derail into a field when his wooden brakes failed, he held a strong grudge against trucks. But he knew it was best not to argue with the Fat Controller. So he left, gnashing his teeth. Be careful, James. Boko told me that the trucks are on strike. They're planning to get rid of you. But James didn't listen. It might have been better if he had. When James arrived at the yards, he waited impatiently for Rosie to arrive with his trucks.
Where is that tank engine? She's gonna make me late!
Just then, an ear-piercing whistle sounded out, and Rosie arrived with James's trucks.
Where have you been, Lazy Wheels?
Sorry I'm late. I had to help Bill and Flynn out in a fire. Anyway, here are your trucks. Make sure you have a set of bootlaces with you.
And Rosie puffed away laughing.
Oh, be quiet, you!
Come on, James. We have to take the truck soon.
James puffed onto the line the trucks were on and bumped them.
Ow!
While they were being coupled to James's tender, the trucks could see that James was in a foul mood. One of the trucks, an old brown one that looked like a steam engine's tender, spoke quietly to the trucks.
There's the rusty red scrap iron. Yep, he really is here, just as you said. Let's say we pay him out for bumping us. Yes, let's. Pay James out! Pay James out!
James, his driver and fireman heard none of this.
Right, you lot! Let's move it!
And James puffed away.
Wait till we get to the top of the hill, lads. Then when I say no, we give him what for.
The trucks giggled. They were soon reaching Gordon's Hill. As James reached the top, the tender truck whispered to the other trucks.
Ready? 1, 2, 3, now!
The trucks started pushing James down the hill.
What the? Oh, scrap! Not again!
On! Chase him! Bump him! Throw him off the rails! Forward, sideways, to the back! Throw the stingray off the track!
James's driver and fireman tried to stop, but James was going too fast. More trouble was to come. Up ahead, Rosie was at a station. She was supposed to be taking a goods train to Great Wyerton, but the signal was jammed. A vandal destroyed the signal's controls, and the station master telephoned the police. No one knew about the runaway James. Just then, James's whistle blew from behind Rosie.
Look out, Rosie!
James's driver and fireman jumped clear, but James wasn't so lucky. He was on his side, which was dented badly on impact. Rosie had also derailed, but was otherwise fine.
Ow.
Are you alright, James?
Aside from a huge dent in my boiler, I'm fine. You?
I'm okay.
Why and how do the pretty ones manage to survive?
Just then, the Fat Controller arrived on board Winston, his track inspection vehicle.
What happened?
I was rough with the trucks and they pushed me down the hill, and I crashed into Rosie's train.
Why am I not surprised?
It wasn't my fault, sir. The signal was down.
Cheer up, Rosie. It wasn't your fault. The signalman informed me earlier that a vandal destroyed the controls in the signal box. The police is currently questioning him.
Good riddance. Ow.
Is something wrong?
James told the Fat Controller about his injuries.
Oh dear, that is not a good sign. Fortunately, we could take you to the steamworks to get a rebuild. It will take a while, but it will give you some time to think before you act next time.
Well said, sir.
A few weeks later at Tidmouth Sheds, Edward and Emily were chatting with each other. Did you hear about James's accident?
Yes, I heard about it from Molly, who heard it from Rosie.
Trevor, who had also heard from Rosie, told me about it as well.
I hope James is alright.
From what I heard, James is having a rebuild, just like Henry did when he had his first accident with the flying kipper.
Really? Molly didn't tell me that.
She probably forgot, or she was exaggerating. Before Emily could continue, a whistle sounded out, and James arrived at Tidmouth Sheds. He looked pretty much the same, but with a few differences. Oh, hey James, we were just talking about you.
Look at yourself. You look completely different.
But James didn't say anything.
Something wrong, James?
James looked at Edward.
Edward, why don't the trucks give you trouble?
What do you mean?
I mean, they always give me trouble whenever I'm pulling them across the island, though not as much as Percy.
I heard that!
But what I'm asking is, why don't they give you trouble?
Edward was surprised. I can't believe you're asking me that question. Emily was also confused. In all her years of being on Sodor, she had never known Edward to be hesitant before.
What is it, Edward?
Well, it's just... I don't want to talk about it.
Why?
It's too complicated for me to tell you.
It's alright, Edward. We're right here.
Edward was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. What I'm about to tell you to, no one else must hear. You got that?
We promise.
Alright. When I first arrived on Sodor in 1915, I had an acquaintance who used to work on the Sodor Mainland Railway in 1897.
Who was he?
He was the same type of engine I was, but with gray paint, black stripes, and the number 15 on his tender. His name was Tiger. Tiger and I were the only two tender engines who ran the Northwestern Railway when it first opened, but we only did one job each. I pulled coaches, while Tiger pulled goods trains. I was kind with the coaches, but like some other engines, Tiger was rough with the trucks.
Ha! Take that, you stupid trucks!
I warned him to be careful, but he took no notice.
Listen, Eddie, when the trucks are rough with you, you should give them a taste of their own medicine.
Not if they're carrying something explosive. But Tiger refused to listen. One day during World War I, the manager came to see us. There's a gun-powered train that needs to be taken to the British Army for our tanks. Tiger, since you're our goods engine, you should take it. When the manager left, I warned Tiger that gunpowder is very explosive and could wipe out an engine if they weren't careful. But as you might have guessed, Tiger refused to listen and left the sheds. I decided to take a nap as passenger trains were canceled due to the war. I closed my eyes. Then... What's that bloomin' neck?
What was that?
I don't know, but we must find out to make sure everyone's alright. I puffed away to where the sound came from. I couldn't bear to think of what happened. When I reached the source of the blast, I was in shock. Pieces of wood, metal, ashes, and fire were spread out. A battered and burnt number 15 laid in front of my wheels. I sighed sadly. I warned him, I thought to myself. There was a long silence in the sheds. No one spoke a word. Then James spoke up.
What happened afterwards?
The fat director came to see me and told me that another engine was to help us, but we weren't sure when he or she would arrive. It was not until 1922 did the engine arrive. He was a cross between a GNR Ivet Class C1 and an LNER Gresley Class A1-A3.
Henry!
Yep.
So, Henry was Tiger's replacement.
Exactly.
How many other engines know about Tiger's incident?
Thomas knows, but he has been sworn to keep it a secret from the others like me.
Why?
Because we don't want to remind ourselves of that terrible tragedy.
Oh, I'm sorry your brother had to die.
It's not your fault. When the other trucks heard the explosion, they were in shock and were afraid that I would make them explode like Tiger did with the gunpowder trucks. That's why they don't bother me. But I think Tiger's incident will teach generations of future Northwest Rally engines to be more careful with trucks, especially if they're loaded with explosive material. James didn't say any more. He had a lot to think about. The next morning, James awoke to find the fat controller in front of him.
James, there's a small gunpowder train that you need to take to the Farquhar Quarry for blasting work. It is waiting for you at the Tidmouth yards. Please go and fetch it.
Yes, sir.
James still didn't like pulling trucks, but he remembered what Edward said earlier about handling trucks. He puffed away to collect his trucks. When he got back to the yards, the trucks were surprised to see him again, but they hardly recognized him because of his rebuild.
Who's this pile of scrap iron? It looks a lot like James, don't you think? I don't know. His red color's in a lighter shade of red. But he also has number 5, like James did.
James cautiously buffered up to his trucks. The trucks were most surprised.
But James doesn't gently buffer up to us. You're right. Do you think it's James's twin? Don't be daft. There aren't any other engines of James's class on this island. At least not that I know of.
James did his best to ignore the trucks.
And another thing, James never ignores what we say to him.
James was soon coupled up to the trucks, and when everything was set up, he set off to the quarry. As he puffed up Gordon's Hill, the trucks decided to test James to see if it was him.
Hold back! Hold back!
The trucks did so, but James didn't do anything. When they reached the top, the trucks gave up and released their brakes. James was careful to slow down so he won't cause an explosion. The trucks tried another trick. They pushed James, but James put on his brakes. The trucks tried all sorts of tricks, but no matter what they did, James didn't show any signs of cruelty to them, so they gave up. Up on the track, there was a tramway that only engines with side plates and cow catchers could travel on. Next to the entrance to the tramway was a safer way for engines that didn't have any of those features. Many engines have used that line before, and have never gotten into trouble because of it. James took the way the other engines used, and soon he arrived at the quarry. Mavis was there, and was surprised to find James in a different shape. She hadn't seen him since the winter had ended, and wasn't informed of his rebuild.
By the manufacturer. Is that you, James?
Yep, it is me, Mavis. I got involved in an accident with some trucks, but I got rebuilt after that.
I see.
The trucks were all shocked.
It is James!
The noise echoed all around the quarry. Not far away, a worker had finished blasting work. He was just getting ready to go home, when all of a sudden, he heard a truck shout, and was so startled that he accidentally dropped an extra barrel of gunpowder. It crashed into a rock, causing an explosion, which caused an avalanche.
Oh, crikey! I'm out of here!
The alarm sounded. Mavis and James looked up to see some rocks falling.
Oh no! Avalanche!
Quickly, we must get the workmen out of here.
Quickly, the workmen got in the brake van and trucks, and Mavis and James left as fast as their wheels would carry them. When the avalanche was over, James and Mavis had returned to the quarry and were very surprised.
Oh my goodness.
The quarry was in a total mess. Rocks had fallen onto the track, smashed up buildings, and some sheds. When the Fat Control arrived, he surveyed the damage.
This is a disaster. How did this avalanche happen?
I don't know, sir. I heard the truck shout and an explosion, and that's when the avalanche happened.
I see.
Just then, the workman who had accidentally dropped the gunpowder barrel came up.
I am guilty. I set off the explosion.
What?
I didn't mean to, sir. I was just coming back home when I heard someone shout so loud that it startled me, and I dropped my gunpowder barrel. It rolled onto a rock, causing the explosion, and... oh, you know the rest.
I see.
I ought to be fired for this whole catastrophe.
It wasn't your fault. If those trucks hadn't startled you, this whole thing wouldn't have happened. I will be speaking to them later. In the meantime, we should clean this whole mess up.
Yes, sir, but who will help us do the job?
I shall send Bill and Ben to help with the cleanup. Since they have experienced an avalanche before, I'm sure they will do fine in helping you two.
James didn't like Bill and Ben, but he was glad that help would be coming. A few weeks later, the quarry was back to its former self. The buildings and sheds were repaired, and the broken tracks were replaced. Bill and Ben were very tired, but triumphant.
Well, that gave us such an exercise, eh, Ben? You can say that again, Bill. Well, that gave us such an exercise, eh, Ben?
The twins laughed, but James just rolled his eyes. Nowadays, James helps out with his goods trains when he is told to, and this time, he doesn't show any signs of resistance. He still hates shunting and trucks, but thanks to Edward's story of Tiger, he knows never to bump them about, 'cause they will give him more accidents if he does. But you may be wondering, who is James's replacement while he had his rebuild? Well, I'm afraid that's another story.